We're going to get to that good news on the vaccine in just a moment. But first, we begin this morning with Minneapolis and the whole country really on edge as a verdict in the murder trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin could come this week. Closing arguments are set to begin today. The prosecution and defense will make their final cases to the jury before it's sequestered for deliberations. Chauvin faces 3 charges in the death of George Floyd: second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. Minneapolis is bracing for potential unrest as the city reckons with another police shooting of an unarmed black man in the midst of the trial. There have been protests every day since the shooting of Daunte Wright. In New York, police officers have been told that they cannot take off any unscheduled days starting today until further notice. And in Philadelphia, more than 1,000 National Guard troops have already been activated. Let's bring in former member of President Obama's task force on 21st century policing, Cedric Alexander. Among his many former law enforcement posts is as a public safety director of DeKalb County in Georgia. And this morning, we are happy to announce he's now an MSNBC law enforcement analyst. We thank you for joining us this morning.
Cedric, thank you so much. What are you expecting this week?
Well, it's going to be an interesting week, and it's going to be fast-moving week as well. If we consider everything, Joe Mika, that's going on in the country at this moment, and we're going to begin to hear these closing arguments today. And I think a lot of people are not really sure which way this trial could potentially go, or the outcome of this could potentially go. So I think it's one of these kind of weeks and days you just tie on your seatbelt and get ready, because we're going to take a ride across this country during these closing arguments. People are going to be waiting, so we'll see.
So, Cedric, a lot of we have seen time and again police officers charged in the killing of black men, and we've seen juries do what juries often do, and that is give the benefit of the doubt to a police officer, whether the victim is white or black or Hispanic. In this case, obviously, America saw what happened over 9.5, 10 minutes. Do you expect a different verdict this week than what we've seen in the past, whether it's come out of Baltimore or North Charleston or even on Staten Island with Eric Gardner?
Well, I think, Joe, it's kind of really hard to tell. If we consider the past history of police officers being convicted for the killing of black men in this country, and let's be very frank about it, in many cases, there have been very few convictions at all overall. But I think we're at a place in this country at this very moment where people are recognizing something here is very much wrong. We've certainly had a lot of opinion from people in the public and across this country. But the real opinion is going to be decided today, or this week, I should say, by a jury of Chauvin's peers. I don't know what this outcome is going to be. There's an opinion according to the public, but it's going to be that jury that's going to decide. But if we look at history, Joe, if we look at history, has always been on the side of those in this country who feel the most oppressed by police. And we got to fix that, because we need public safety. We need good public safety.
Yeah. Eddie Glaude, of course, if we look at the past, if we look at past verdicts, when police officers are standing trial, then there's not reason to believe. There's not a good reason to believe that Derek Chauvin will be convicted, that the jury will come down with a guilty verdict. That said, if you look at the fact that so many of his fellow police officers and police experts actually testified against him, there's reason to believe that maybe this time may be different. What are your thoughts going into this week, where, my gosh, over the next few days, we should know what that verdict's going to be in a case that transfixed America for over a year?
Yes, Joe. Well, so look, I'm not sure I think I agree with you to the extent to which the prosecution has put on an extraordinarily strong case. The evidence is clear. The fellow officers who testified against Chauvin, which suggests that the jury will come back with a guilty verdict on all three counts in some ways. But, you know, the defense was playing to a jury of one. That's all they needed. That's all they need is one juror to have reasonable doubt to hang this jury. So, you know, we can't run ahead, get ahead of our skis, to use Mika's favorite phrase, right? Or one of Mika's favorite phrases. We can't get ahead of our skis here. And I also think we can't expect, an Atticus Finch closing argument on the part of the prosecution here. We need to just kind of put ourselves in a space to kind of prepare for what will come down the pike, because we still have this extraordinary national debate, Joe, about the form of policing. Whatever the decision will be in this trial, we still have to address how police engage in their work across the country. So we still have a lot of work to do moving forward.
Yeah, and that work has a lot to do with de-escalation and what leads up to a shooting, especially in the case of Daunte Wright. You can look at every decision that was made before, and that there is room for improvement on many levels across the country. Jonathan Lemire, what is the White House thinking about this, preparing in any way? How connected are they to watching this verdict come down and being prepared to react?
I mean, they've been watching it warily for weeks now, Mika. The White House from the podium, of course, they're not going to weigh in one way or the other on what they think should happen with the verdict. President Biden has been clear that what he thought what happened to George Floyd was a tragedy, and that this is a story that has told far too often in communities and black households across the nation. Certainly there will be a federal response. National Guard, we're seeing, is being activated throughout the country, and not just in Minnesota, but other cities as well. The president and his team are going to be watching this very carefully. There could indeed be, they're expecting him to hear from him as soon as the verdict is done, or very soon thereafterwards. But even prior to that, we saw him meet with leaders of the Congressional Black Caucus last week, in which he talked about the needing to just change the fundamental relationship between Black Americans and police officers in this country. This was a central focus of his presidential campaign after Floyd's death, and we have seen it happen far too often since then in other moments where black men have died at the hands of white police officers. They are, of course, concerned there could be some violence breaking out. They encourage protests, and we should always underscore the majority of protests after Floyd's death last year were very peaceful. There were times, though, of course, where it did escalate into violence. And I think you will see a coordinated federal response. They're talking to governors. They're talking to mayors in big cities. Certainly a lot of focus on Minneapolis, but throughout the nation, just in case, if there is a verdict, if there is some sort of outcry and outburst, if there is some violence, the federal government will be quick to mobilize.